3:52 is our KTSA news time. We're going to get started with our segment where you can ask a doctor questions about coronavirus, and we're really glad to have Dr. Mark Haverkorn back with us to take those calls at 210-599-5555. He's a medical doctor, a board-certified oral surgeon and dentist, and has River City Oral Surgery. You've heard me talk about it. And Dr. Haverkorn, welcome back. Thank you.
Thank you for having me again, Jack. I appreciate it.
I want to ask you a question I've been asking each of our doctors each day. As you look at the numbers for Bexar County and San Antonio, thoughts about where we are, better than you thought it would be, worse than you thought it would be? Do you read anything into the statistics?
Well, right now I'm probably a little better than I thought we would be based on just, all the hype that came out. But I think from what I've been talking to a lot of doctors, and I think we all kind of agree that we're still early, So yeah, we're not New York City right now, but we haven't cleared that hurdle either.
Right.
And it's not time to let our guard down yet.
There's an article in the Journal of the American Academy of Ophthalmology which urges people who wear contact lenses to consider wearing glasses more often, because wearing contact lenses causes you to touch your eyes more, and of course you have to touch them to put them in. Does that seem like a precaution you would take, or is that maybe going a little too far, or what?
That's interesting. I hadn't heard of that. It stands to reason in my mind. I wear glasses every day. I've never tried wearing contacts. Yeah, I think, if a person has the choice, if you've got glasses at home and you've got contacts and you've got the choice, probably wear glasses. I mean, a lot of us are working from home, so what does it matter anyway,
That's very true. Very true.
Yeah.
You can let a lot of things go. 210-599-5555, your question for Dr. Haverkorn, or you can send me an email, jack@ktsa.com, and I'll be happy to ask him your question. Tom wants to know, do you think the United States should actually be trying to help other countries right now, or keep all of its output of medical supplies and equipment here in the United States?
Well, that's a tough question.
That's a political question, but I thought I'd throw it at you anyway.
There's a medical ethics component to that, too. It's kind of like the question about sharing ventilators. I think we're an altruistic people. We've always been an altruistic people. Obviously, we need stuff here in America, but, in select cases, maybe with some discernment, I think it's okay to share that stuff.
On the ventilator question, I heard an interesting comment from, I forget who said it yesterday. It might have been Dr. Birx, or it might have been one of the other people, but they were talking about the fact that there are a lot of ventilators in this country in places that are not currently hotspots. So when we hear about the great need or deficit for them in the hotspot areas, they do exist. They're just not always where we need them right now. Is that safe to say?
Yes, I agree with that statement. I think even not. I think there's, I know there's many counties in Texas that haven't even been affected, but I know that there are plenty of places in America where the ventilators aren't in great demand, and it would be great if we could sort of figure out a way to move them around quickly. I mean, Amazon can get me something in 2 hours. Maybe we can get a ventilator somewhere overnight.
Yeah. Although then I guess the question would be, would you get it back when it came to be your turn, or your state's turn, right?
Right. No, you would need some sort of national clearinghouse. There are actually a few websites set up that have this goal, but they haven't all consolidated into one. But there are websites where health professionals, hospitals, probably government agencies can go register what they have, make a request for what they need, and trade that stuff around.
On the ventilator question also, I mentioned this earlier, they're working on the possibility of more than one patient being able to be served by the same ventilator. Can you kind of tell us in layman's terms what that means or how that would work?
Yeah, so a ventilator, a couple things. One, we hear the term ventilator and respirator. When we talk about that in the medical world, respirators are the masks. They're the N95 type masks. Ventilators are the mechanical breathing machines. You can have a pure ventilator, which is what we're mostly talking about, but operating rooms have an anesthesia machine that has a ventilator and the capability of giving anesthetic gases all in the same machine. Now, you don't have to give those gases. You can use the OR as just a pure ventilator. The ventilators, you put a breathing tube down your throat into your trachea just above where the trachea splits and goes to the two lungs, and then you pump positive pressure air into the lungs. And you can play with the mixture of oxygen and air. And you can also do things like turn that into basically a CPAP machine. And so you can affect how much pressure is being put in there and how much pressure is being held there even when the patient expires. Exhales, sorry, not dies. The problem with splitting the vents is that it's very hard to control all those fine settings and fine tailor the vent to two different people. Mm-hmm. And so probably one person is going to get a little more benefit than the other person. And then the ethics question becomes, do you split a vent that might have saved one person, and when you split it, you end up letting two people die? That's a tough question.
I guess that is a tough question, and I can't imagine how you would make that call, although we may have to.
Yeah.
I guess I'm also wondering if we have any idea yet what percentage of coronavirus patients need a ventilator. In other words, not everyone who is treated for coronavirus needs one, right?
Right, yeah. Man, the numbers are all over the place depending on where you look and what country you're talking about. From what I think, just off the top of my head, I think it's about 15% of patients get serious, 15% of patients that show up to the hospital are serious, critical patients, and then only a smaller subset of those people actually end up on a ventilator.
Right, so you could be in a situation where you were needing hospitalization but still able to breathe on your own.
Yes, and before we get to the ventilator, we can put on a CPAP machine in the hospital, like people use for sleep apnea. We can also use a BiPAP machine. Then there's questions about those things because they may aerosolize viruses and expose your nurses and your respiratory therapists and whoever else is around. But that can be done before you're intubated.
All right, we're going to take the break here for news, come back with Dr. Mark Haverkorn. He's going to join us again in a few minutes after the news. And you have a question for him, 210-599-5555 on KTSA San Antonio. KTSA News Time 4:04 as we continue here in the late afternoon. So the president has signed the coronavirus relief bill, and the wheels are turning on that. We're taking calls for Dr. Mark Haverkorn, who is a board-certified oral surgeon, medical doctor, and dentist. Your questions about coronavirus, how to stay safe, best practices, symptoms, what should I do, what do I need to know, all of that right now. So grab a line, 210-599-5555. We'll take those calls. Valerie on Facebook sent me a story, Dr. Haverkorn from NPR. Headline, Mystery in Wuhan, recovered coronavirus patients test negative, then positive. And to kind of sum it up, they're seeing a spate of second-time infections, which calls into question the accuracy of their testing. Now, we know that China had a problem with testing all throughout their own experience with coronavirus testing. And now we also know that in many countries that purchased test kits from China, I've heard Spain had this experience, Czechoslovakia had this experience, a huge number. The Czechs, 80% of the Chinese tests were flawed. So are you more likely to think their testing is bad, or does this raise a concern for you that maybe we don't really know enough about this thing to know when you're clear of it?
I think it's probably more of a testing issue. You remember when we first got those patients at Lackland Air Force Base here, and the one lady was discharged, and soon after she was discharged, the third test came up positive. The reason is there's a false negative rate that's pretty high on some of these tests. It can be as high as 40%, depending on exactly which test you're looking at. So I think I think we have a good understanding, at least in general, of how coronaviruses and viruses work, but it's getting an accurate test, and I don't know if that's just a problem with Chinese manufacturing or just the fact that some tests are not as sensitive as others.
Again, in kind of layman's terms, what makes a test present a false reading? Is it the way that the sample is collected, or is it the way that it's analyzed, or is it the reagent, or can it be all those things, or what?
The answer is yes.
Okay.
You're going to make me go back to my statistics class in school, but the way when we talk in medicine, and I think probably everywhere about testing, we talk about sensitivity and specificity. You're going to see that in your news articles that you read. Sensitivity is the ability to determine if somebody is well, I'm sorry, let me put it in layman's. If a test is sensitive, then the false negative rate is low. It means that you can find people who have the disease. And the problem is that a lot of our tests are not very sensitive, or at least, some of these. That's why the sensitivity rates are maybe 60%. 40% of the patients who have the disease test negative. Specificity is, okay, if the test is positive, is it true? Is that a true positive, or is it a false positive? And right now, in an epidemic, what we're really looking for, what we care more about, is the sensitivity. Can we accurately say someone's negative? We don't worry as much about whether or not the positive is correct.
I see what you're saying. So a false negative is more dangerous than a false positive.
Right, because a false positive, well, in this case, it's not, we're not going to start pumping them full of chemotherapy or anything. We're just going to watch them. And then if they're a false positive, it'll become obvious that that's a false positive.
Right.
But if it's a false negative, you send them back out in the community. And that may be what China's seeing.
Yeah. Good point. By the way, we should mention we've learned in the last half hour that ESPN's sideline reporter for the NBA, Doris Burke, has also announced she has COVID-19. She's had symptoms since March 11th, she says. Kathy is on line number 1 with a question for Dr. Mark Haverkorn on KTSA. Kathy, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for taking my call. Sure. I'm wondering what science is behind now, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist. What science is behind the fact that this came out of Wuhan? Only because I wonder if we're asymptomatic a lot of times. Has this virus been floating around for a while and we didn't know, and then elderly are dying in the hospital from a diagnosis of quote unquote viral pneumonia, but we haven't identified it yet? But in Wuhan is where they identified it.
That is possible, for sure, and it's going to be hard to really ever know the answer for sure. You may have heard about these antibody tests that are coming out now. Henry Schein just got approval for that, I believe, today. The antibody tests are what will really show us who's been exposed to it in the past and who has the disease now. And it'd be interesting to look at how many Americans actually have antibodies to this virus. That's not really going to tell us how long it's been around, but your theory's possible. It seems like it's probably came out of China because that's really where it was noticed first. But I think the epidemiologists will look back on this over the next year or two, and they'll have an answer to that question.
Great question, Kathy. Thank you. Thanks for asking it. And I know that part of the complication with this, too, is that the Chinese have been very opaque in their counts and in their accounts of what's going on. And in fact, I was reading somewhere this week that there are 21 million fewer cell phone accounts in China since the beginning of the year. And the significance of that is that the Chinese culture, the Chinese society is very dependent on cell phones. Everyone has one. They need them for lots of things we don't all use them for. Many people have more than one account to their name even. And they said that's got to mean something in terms of either not that 21 million people have died, but that some great number of people are either sick or displaced or not making any money or something like that, right?
Yes, I think so. I saw another possible explanation was migrant workers who may come to China may not be using phones, but still, I think that's true. most of the studies that I see, and even in the American journals, are out of China. And it's really hard to know if you can trust that stuff. I think there's honest doctors over there, but there are very dishonest political leaders, obviously.
Yeah, very well said. What do you make of Dr. Michael Levitt, the Stanford biophysicist, who's been he was very outspoken early on in analyzing where this was going to go, very prescient in January and saying how it would roll out in China. He predicted that Italy would be hard hit. And now he is saying, Dr. Levitt, that he thinks the United States will come to the turning point sooner than expected and with far less of a casualty rate than expected. What do you make of him?
I hope that's true. I've seen that stuff. I haven't read all of his press releases in full, but I hope that's true. We're not going to know until we get there. Yeah. I do think that we're going to see that the death rate is going to be lower than what we thought coming out of China or Iran or Italy. But if this virus is as contagious as we think it is, then so many people are going to have it that even a low death rate could, especially in local areas, overwhelm the hospitals. So I think there may be some good news coming, or it may not end up being as bad as we think. But we're also not at the point where we can just let down our guard and say ignore it, because we don't want San Antonio to become one of those cities that gets overwhelmed.
You know, you talk about ethical questions. Here's one I think we struggle with in the media and in government. I think people are loath to report good news because they're afraid that some will act on it as I don't have to be so careful. Now, a thinking person would take what I just said about Dr. Levitt and say, of course, I still don't want to get this thing, even if he's right. That doesn't change the contagiousness of it. That doesn't change how unpleasant and temporarily life-altering it'll be. But I think there's a tendency to think, well, we've got to always mention the worst-case scenario because that will cause the greatest number of people to stay in and stay home. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I don't think that's right. I don't think we should do that, but I think that's what we are doing.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you didn't hear stories like that early on. We're starting to see that more. I think the Wall Street Journal published an op-ed 2 days ago from a group of doctors also from Stanford about this. You're right. That's always been the thing in the news world, right? That, if it bleeds, it leads, and somebody who's got good news maybe doesn't get heard.
Right, as if it would be irresponsible to give people hope because of what they would do with hope. We think they would act recklessly or prematurely. And by the same token, when you get on television and you start screaming about how we need 1 million ventilators, no one can wrap their head around that. I mean, no one can. That isn't even a conversation you can have. Right.
No, that's just a number, what do you do with that? You need some people who are thinking rationally. You need some leaders who listen to the medical doctors and who listen. I know it's maybe not real popular right now, but listen to the economists too. And how do you balance all of this? It's a good question. That's what we elect our leaders for, and that's why we have elections. We pass a judgment on them.
Yeah, and we also have to be more discerning consumers of all this stuff.
Yes.
Maybe now more than ever. Quick break here. We're coming back after we check KTSA Time Saver Traffic. We have one more segment with Dr. Haverkorn. Get your question answered about coronavirus. It's 4:20 on KTSA. We're awaiting the start of the White House Coronavirus Task Force briefing. We'll join that when it gets started here. And later on tonight, we'll also have the city and county COVID-19 briefing here on KTSA, as well as all the breaking news of the day as it happens, and your chance to talk about it. We have a little more time here to visit with Dr. Mark Haverkorn from River City Oral Surgery and ask your COVID-19 questions. He's a medical doctor as well as a board-certified oral surgeon, and questions about prevention, best practices. Is it safe to do this? Would you recommend I do that? 210-599-5555. Lot of talk today, Doctor, about how the United States has become the leading COVID-19 case country, but I don't think that's really a surprise in the scheme of things. That was bound to happen given the size of our population and the fact that we draw travelers from all over the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And still, we're not leading on a per capita basis, although we may at some point. But yeah, I mean, we're the wealthiest country in the world. We have relatively lax immigration. I know that's a hot topic, but people can come visit pretty easily. That's not a big surprise that we lead in the absolute numbers.
This is a question from Dan, who wants to know, and I hope this is a hypothetical question, Dan. We're thinking good thoughts for you and your family, but he says, what would be the doctor's advice if you are living with someone who has coronavirus or you think might be?
Well, you need to quarantine that person in your house, preferably, like a bedroom that has its own bathroom, and that person ought to stay in there until they're, quote, cured. And the good news is most people do get cured. This is not a death sentence when you get it. I know we talk about that, but most people do get cured. It would be good to, pass food and water to them. I know it sounds extreme, but put the supplies outside the door, walk away, and then let them get it. Maybe put a laptop out there or something so they can use that. Obviously, you don't want to share things. Whatever toothbrush they use during that time ought to be thrown away at the end, and wash the sheets just like normal. The CDC says just regular laundry detergents is fine for whatever you've got to wash. And then as far as the definition of cured, the CDC is saying 3 days that have passed since the last fever and at least 7 days since the symptoms first occurred. And you can find that on the CDC's website.
Mm-hmm. So it's really the same things you would do if you were taking care of somebody who had the regular flu or just some other seasonal illness as far as, like you said, cleanliness, hygiene. Would a humidifier help a person in this situation, do you think?
It may. I have actually seen conflicting thoughts. A lot of the stuff you see right now in the literature is just people making educated guesses.
Yeah.
Somebody says, well, it might be bad because of this, and then someone says, no, it's fine because of this. I think it's okay to try that humidifier. I wanted to, if this is maybe a good place to interject. Last week you had a guy call and ask, what do? I don't have health insurance. I don't have a doctor. Where do I go?
Yeah.
One answer for that is to consider, if you don't have insurance to use and you don't have a doctor and you do think you need to be checked, you can consider something called direct primary care, which are, like my practice, they're cash pay primary care doctors. There's many in San Antonio. They'll tell you what it costs, and it's reasonable rates. A lot of them are doing telemedicine right now, but if you don't want to go into the ER, if you think you might be sick but you're not struggling to breathe, that might be something that you do. And doesn't break the bank. Sorry.
No, that's great to know. How would one find in their community the direct patient care doctors?
So that's what I would Google: San Antonio Direct Primary Care. There are, I can tell you names, but I don't know if I should. But there are many in the community that would be happy. And also, I'm part of this group called the San Antonio Free Market Medical Association. Several of our members are in that, and you could look at that.
Okay, that's great advice, I think. And kind of piggybacking off of Dan's question, because it's put me in mind of it. So he was concerned about, what if I have a family member who's sick? How do you live with someone if your husband or wife is a medical worker and they're coming home from those long shifts at the hospital? And right now, these hospitals here in San Antonio are not like it, but obviously, people are coming home to their families in some of these hotspot regions every night or every day. What precautions would you take if you were doing that?
Well, I can tell you what I do right now. I'm fortunate to have a shower in my office, so I'm wearing street clothes switching into my scrubs. I've got work shoes that stay here, as do all my staff. I take off my clothes carefully, take a shower, and put on my street clothes before I leave. A lot of my friends are literally peeling off their clothes in the garage and leaving them out there, and then going straight to the shower. And if you're worried that you have been exposed, they're distancing from their family. They may not be in complete isolation if they don't have symptoms, but they're sitting across the room and not touching and, being extra careful.
Yeah. That's, you think about how long the shifts are right now for some of those New York doctors and nurses, it must be hell to come home to your family and then have to socially distance from them. But as you say, it's the only thing to do right now.
It really is. I mean, all the treatment right now is supportive. You know, we just try to keep people healthy, and we don't have a cure yet.
Let me get to Doug's question for Dr. Haverkorn here on KTSA on line 1. Doug, go ahead.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Jack. Long-time listener and love your program.
Thank you.
What about a sauna? Would what sauna, steam sauna, help out? And if so, how about some kind of like eucalyptus or any kind of oils also? Does that help? And I'm not talking preventative. I guess I'm talking if I get it.
I would be reluctant to use a sauna personally. I can't give you a source on this, and I know Jack had asked about a humidifier a little bit ago, but warm, damp air sounds like a good way for a virus to grow, or at least, viruses aren't, we don't really consider them technically alive, but it's a good way to keep them viable in my mind. I think I would personally avoid that.
Okay, that's Doug. Thanks for the question, and I know that's come up before too. And I guess another reason for that would be that you don't want to do anything to kind of deplete yourself, right, at a time when you're fighting the virus. Getting really sweaty and being all limp and worn out would not be the way to do that.
Right.
You're probably trying to force fluids, not secrete them, right?
Yes, I agree with that.
All right, so stay away from the sauna for now, and you probably can't go there anyway. Jose is on line number 2 with a question for Dr. Haverkorn. Go ahead. Okay, we don't have that one, so that's okay. Let's see. We have time for, I think, one more call. Where am I going here? Am I going to line 1? No? All right, I'm going to ask a question I have then, because I think we were having a little trouble with the phone. So before I let you go, Dr. Haverkorn, in terms of the end of the 15 days, and again, this is a tricky question, we're coming to the end of the so-called 15 days to flatten the curve. I think it's safe to say we don't know if we've flattened it, right? What are your thoughts for the next 2 weeks in terms of how we're living now? It kind of looks to me like we're just going to continue everything for at least the next couple of weeks.
I think that's probably what we're going to end up doing. I think in another 2 weeks or so, we'll have a better idea, in San Antonio for sure, and maybe nationwide, how things are headed. Just as much as everybody else, I want my business open, and my employees want the business open, my vendors want the business open. I mean, I get it, and that is a real concern. I think when people say you shouldn't even think like that, I don't think that's true. But at the same time, it's just a little bit early now, and I agree with you, probably 2 more weeks or so.
I think it's good to have a little bit of tension or ongoing, maybe negotiation isn't the right word, but I think it's okay to have the voices of, hey, we need to make a living, alongside the voices of, hey, science tells us, or precautions tell us, because those things both are valid. The science is valid and the economics are valid, right?
Yes, they are. They're both valid, and each side wants to kind of say the other isn't valid, or at least the extremists, but they're both valid concerns. If you don't think that life expectancy is going to go down in this country if we fall into some sort of third world type living standard, you're wrong. So we've got to consider that.
Yeah, well said. And Dr. Haverkorn, thank you for the time. We appreciate it at a busy time like this. Hope to get you back on the show again next week.
Oh, it'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to take a